This is a download from the BBC of the World Football Phone-In, which is broadcast as part of the Up All Night programme on 5 Live on Saturday mornings. Here's the latest edition.
Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning, Dutton.
Kenny, just starting off with you, first of all, and Sean, you want to come in on this as well. We've had a text message, and gentlemen, you might want to explain this to us. Jim in Glasgow says, hail, hail to the legend Dino, but can you ask the big wheel if he saw the recent game between Beckham's LA Galaxy and the good doctor's Real Salt Lake, where an Argentinian player, while celebrating a goal, did a backflip and on landing broke his ankle. I'm assuming Sean saw the game, so I'll let him tell you the punchline, but I suppose the good doctor's got to kick off first. This was a medical injury after all.
Yeah, it was unfortunate given that the goal he was celebrating was actually disallowed 2 minutes after it was scored, so it was a bit of a kick in the teeth, to be honest.
Kenny, I'm glad you said it and not me. Poor Fabian Espindola.
Oh, that's made my night already, that.
But going back to that, it's been fortunate that it has been confirmed that he hasn't actually broken his ankle. It's just badly sprained. But he could still be out up to 8 weeks. So hopefully we've gone back for the playoffs if we make it.
So why do footballers do it, Kenny? I mean, it's a dangerous celebration, these backflips. Why do they do it?
Yeah, I mean, he's scored a few goals already this season, and normally on our home field, which is the turf, it's hard ground, and he's been able to do the flip without any problems whatsoever. I don't think he got enough purchase off the ground, and he under-rotated and just went over on it, and that was the end of his game after about 15 minutes.
Sean, can you add more?
Well, that's exactly what happened. Fabian Espindola, who's a nice Argentinian player, and again, Kenny said it, I didn't have to, but yes, the offside flag was up, so I think that's double embarrassment. Something that's really interesting, and Kenny, if you can talk about this, is that you're actually going to transition now from your home ground, which is Rice-Eccles Stadium. You play on, well, it's a pretty ugly artificial pitch. It's very, very bouncy. It's used primarily for collegiate American football, University of Utah. And on that artificial surface, you're the only unbeaten side at home this year. I'm just wondering what your feeling is now, because you've been playing on this fake grass all season, and next month you go into a brand new soccer-specific stadium, which is going to be your new home, but it has a natural grass surface.
Yeah, it'll probably be difficult for us because the teams that come to play us now will relish the prospect of playing in such a nice stadium. It's obviously going to be a great surface. It's looking lovely. We're going to have a full house at the first game, probably the second game there as well. So teams don't like to come and play us at Rice-Eccles on that turf. I mean, it's an old generation turf. It's maybe 15, 20 years old, and it's got all the American football lines on it, and teams just don't like to play there. The ball doesn't bounce the same as it does on grass. So I think that'll be the biggest problem for us, that teams will relish the prospect of coming to play at such a nice stadium. Hopefully we can continue on our home record, and the fans can get behind us and help us out that way.
A question for you all, gentlemen. The big discussion in Britain, football-wise, for the second week running, really is about the emergence of foreign money into particularly the Premiership. This from Jim in Blackburn, who says that Man City is his team, now one of the richest teams in the country, able to buy all the world's best players. Can your football experts convince me that this is not the beginning of the end for world football? And by that, I think he means that, well, we're going to be able to buy all the players from other leagues and deprive those other leagues of some of their star players. And that's been echoed by Dale as well, who sent a text saying, I've been thinking that with the money now available in the UK, could we see a bigger drain on, specifically for him, Brazilian talent? Tim?
Well, I think you have to say perhaps hooray for international football, because, globalisation means concentration. It does. It means bigger, fewer banks all around the world, and it means the inevitable conglomeration of talent in football to a few big clubs in the major European leagues, especially at the moment the English League. So the dynamic of club football is increasingly corporate and increasingly concentration. But what I think is so fascinating about international football is quite often you see the opposite dynamic happening. Exactly because players from the periphery of the global economy are coming in and getting experience in the big leagues, it means that the playing field is so level. Let's take Africa, for example. If you look at the then Zaire in the 1974 World Cup, they could play a little bit, but they'd never seen a cross in their lives. They'd just been kept out of the loop of global football. They came across Yugoslavia, who kept crossing the ball. They just couldn't cope with it. They were unsure about some of the rules. They were very perturbed when Brazil had a free kick on the edge of the area and Brazil placed men inside their defensive wall. They'd never seen that before. That really got them going. You contrast that with the African first-timers in the last World Cup. Very sophisticated. Ivory Coast, first-timers, looked very, very interesting indeed. And you look at the squad list and you see that almost all of them are based in European football. So I think that football is too big to be killed by things like this. It'll always find ways to pop up. And international football is one of the ways where the balance of the game can be restored. And look at South America at the moment. Top 4 points clear of the World Cup qualification campaign. 4 points clear after 8 rounds. It's not Brazil. It's not Argentina, it's Paraguay, a tiny, impoverished country, and they're well on course to qualifying for their fourth consecutive World Cup. So if some of the corporate trends of globalization and concentration tip the balance too far, because football is always walks a tightrope between culture and between business. If the balance is being tipped too far in club football, I think we've got international football still to enjoy.
And Dr. Duca, wasn't it the cash that tempted you away from Gretna to Real Salt Lake?
The cash in America isn't actually that great for the players, particularly over here, the American-born players. They struggle because they don't have any other options with regards to going to other countries, and because of work permits and regulations that you have to play 75% of the international games to be able to, particularly for the UK, to obtain a work permit there. So some of these guys over in the MLS aren't getting paid a great deal of money, and obviously there's the salary cap, so you have a few players that earn a lot, like David Beckham. He's guaranteed about $5 or $6 million a year, and some of the younger guys in the league are maybe only earning $13,000 a year. So there's a big disparity between some of the players that are representing their teams in the first 11.
And would a cash influx spoil the spirit of the game over there, do you think?
I think if you took away the salary cap, this year the league has been very, very competitive. It's so tight. Any team could still qualify for the playoffs. It's just so competitive over here, and that's a lot to do with the salary caps, and everybody's really competing on a level playing field. And from one year to the next, you don't know if one team's going to create a good run and maybe go to the playoffs. And once you're in the playoffs, any team can win it. So it definitely makes it interesting and a lot more competitive. Obviously back home, you're looking at, in the English Premier League, you're looking at one team from three possibly winning the league in the end. And in the Premier League in Scotland, it's always going to be either Celtic or Rangers. So, it definitely makes it a lot more interesting here that everybody's on a level playing field.
Sean, what's your view of this?
Just overall, one of the things that I think is great about football, which is clearly the greatest sport in the world, I think everybody listening to this program, and all four of us will agree with that, is the global aspects of it. And I know sometimes it's difficult when you see someone from outside of your country. Certainly, I think at a time, maybe people had trouble with ownership outside of their own city coming in and purchasing the club. But football has moved past the days where you're getting people coming from the same hometown, you're getting people coming from the same country into your 11. That's just the reality of football, that your 11, it might very well be owned by someone from outside of a country, and there might be 9, 10, 11 nationalities represented in your starting 11. Major League Soccer is better because footballers like Kenny Duker have come over to the league from Scotland. I would not want to be part of Major League Soccer if they only had American players, and I think really just about everybody would agree that the Premiership is better when they relax the foreign player restrictions. Does anybody listening really want to see the Premier League with all English players? Maybe a few people, but I think they're probably stuck in a different era. The global aspects of the game, for all the negatives, have really made the sport, I think, much better, much more competitive. I was actually having a conversation with a man named Zoran Savic, who was a Yugoslavian youth international in the 1970s and 1980s, now working as one of my summarizers on Major League Soccer television. He was talking to me about how there are so many nations in Europe and Africa and South America that are more competitive than when he was playing international football 20, 25 years ago. And what we both kind of came up with in that conversation was because if you come from, say, Nigeria, you have an opportunity to play for one of the biggest clubs in the world. You didn't have that opportunity in the 1970s. If you come from Latvia, well, what would you have hoped to do if you came from Latvia 25 years ago, played in the Soviet League, but you weren't going to get out? You have a chance to come from a tiny country. You have a chance to come from Kansas, where I'm from. You have a chance to come from Scotland. You have a chance to come from anywhere and play for some of the biggest clubs and some of the best leagues in the world. You then take all of that ability that's been refined to your national side. That enhances football. I just simply don't see a downside with the globalization. It's just something that people have to move past. If we were having this conversation and it were 1988 instead of 2008, we'd probably be talking about this nasty trend in football with all the foreign players now coming into our clubs. Now, 20 years on, we're talking about the foreign ownership and the foreign money.
Tom indeed says, loved the quote from Deco this week. I think the quote being, I think Robinho's only gone to Man City for the money. And of course, Deco never left Barca because of Chelsea's great history. The good doctor, I should tell you this, you know, Sean Wheelock's not going to be happy when I say this because he feels that you have to have pedigree to reach these levels. But, however, these dizzying heights that you've reached on our World Football phone-in, our producers decided it's time that we gave you a Brazilian shirt name. Now, it's a ritual that we go through with those who have been with us long enough, and this is...
Don, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Kenny clearly has the clout to get that. Absolutely. This is his third time on the World Football phone-in, but he's a medical doctor, a first-choice footballer. He's banged in just boatload of goals. Absolutely, he deserves the Brazilian name in the shirt, no question.
Listen, I could have given you his record. You know, this guy's banged in as many hat-tricks in a season as Jimmy Greaves.
He's a phenomenal goal scorer. I think right now he's probably the best target striker in Major League Soccer.
So we're all agreed it's time to give him a Brazilian shirt name. Don't worry, Doctor. It'll be painless, as you doctors like to say. But it does depend on what our listeners think. So Kenny Duca is with us, the good doctor from Gretna originally, but now with Real Salt Lake. We want a Brazilian shirt name for him, please. He's not going to be with us for much longer tonight. Well, hopefully we'll be able to tempt him to stay at least so we've got a proper Brazilian shirt name for him. So what should it be? We've got the Legendinho, of course. We've got the Big Wheel. We've got, of course, the Ronaldinho in Australia. That's our Australian football correspondent. You won't get Ronaldinho, so that's the good news, Doc.
I'm pleased about that.
Yeah. and neither will you get sorry, what's the Cossack one? Oh, I forgot. Our Russian football correspondent. I forgot all of a sudden. Ah, gosh. What is it? Can anybody remind me? Tim, do you remember?
It's gone. No, it's gone.
Sean, do you remember?
I'm completely blanking on it.
Hey, our producer tonight. What's our Cossack football shirt name? Oh, the Cosanova. That was it. The Cosanova.
That's it.
Okay, let's take the first call, though. Bura in Sheffield. Good morning.
Good morning, Don. Hi.
Good to speak to you, mate.
I had two questions to Tim. One about Ariel Ortega and what he's up to in Argentina at the moment, because I heard that he was about to move to Estudiantes from River Plate, and I don't know whether that transfer went through. And the second one is about a keeper called Tafarel, who used to play for Brazil, and what he's up to nowadays, and where Tim puts him in the greats of all-time Brazilian keepers.
I think very, very highly, you know. He wasn't a particularly big goalkeeper. It wasn't particularly flashy. But, you know, the pressure of being Brazil's goalkeeper in a World Cup, I don't think there's any position in sport which has quite that much pressure on it. You've got a nation of 180 million. You probably don't have that much to do, but from time to time, what you do have to do can be absolutely vital. And the big virtue of Taffarel, I think, was his temperament. I remember interviewing him shortly before the 98 World Cup, and he made it very clear to me there that he thought Brazil wouldn't defend well enough in that World Cup to win the crown, and I think he was proved right. But he said, and it sounds kind of a bit corny, but I think it's so right. He said that the big thing for a keeper in his situation, you mustn't get carried away when things are going well or when things are going badly. Just keep that level head. And he played 3 World Cups for Brazil and hardly made a mistake. So I think you have to rate him very, very highly. And I also think he's like the pioneer, if you like, going over to Europe, playing in Italy, playing in Turkey, that I know you have a connection with, and really opening the doors for this generation of Brazilian keepers that are doing so well in Europe at the moment. And Brazilian keepers have really conquered Italy now, and they're beginning to go to other countries as well. And I think a lot of that is down to the example left and well remembered by Taffarel. Ariel Ortega is one of those South Americans who should probably, in contrast to Taffarel, should probably be stamped not for export. He went to Italy, it didn't work. He went to Spain, it didn't work. He went to Turkey, it didn't work. And unfortunately, and one of the reasons it's never worked for him abroad is his failure to adapt and his liking for alcohol, which is a disease. He is an alcoholic. He has a serious problem with this. His old teammate, Diego Simeone, was his coach at River Plate, and they fell out one time too many, with Ortega getting drunk and missing training. So what's happened now is that Ortega has gone to Mendoza, near the border with Chile. He's playing for a second division club called Independiente Rivadavia, and he's supposed to be going to a kind of dry-out sessions over the border in Chile, a clinic that he's attended in the past. There's just some news in the last few hours that River Plate are not entirely sure that he's following this dry-out program as thoroughly as he might be. So, and tragically, I think the story of Ariel Ortega, they're opposites, I think, Taffarel and Ortega. Taffarel achieved everything, every little bit of his potential. Taffarel had the wonderful mentality and the level head to achieve it. Ariel Ortega, such a gifted player, one of the best in the world at the sudden stop and a change of direction. But because of his temperamental flaws, has 80 caps for Argentina and several World Cups. But if his head had just been screwed on a little bit better, I think he could achieve much, much more.
I thought he had the potential to be the next Maradona if anyone else was out of that title before.
I vividly remember, this is the Copa America of 1999 in Paraguay, when Ortega was playing along with Martin Palermo. And the contrast between them was so great. It was like Palermo had such limited talent, but he wanted it so much. And Ortega had such incredible talent, but he was more interested sometimes in conning the referee and falling over than he was in getting past his man and producing the final thing. The ability that Ortega had and still has, he's kind of mid-30s now, the ability that he has is genius level, I think. Unfortunately, I don't think his achievements has quite matched that.
Bura, thanks a lot for the call. Appreciate it. We've got Kenny Duca with us still, and but I'll say you've had such a good response to your Brazilian shirt name. Let me run a few past you, and then I'll tell you what's in the lead. You might not enjoy it, by the way. Anyway, the shirt name Serginho, we've had one. Doctinho, says Jonathan in Croydon. Hi Dotton, says Richard in Stonykerk. The Doc's shirt name could be Medicinho. I think you're getting the drift, aren't you? and indeed, Anne, you've got a suggestion yourself.
Yeah, well, you've just been talking about a great goalkeeper. He's a great goal scorer, so why shouldn't he be Taffarel?
Ooh, very nice. Well, we're going to hold that one, actually. That's going to be up there amongst them. We've got the obvious ones like Hagisio. That's from Tony in South.
I like that one.
And Ollie says, I think Ollie knows a little bit of Portuguese because he's gone for Ekosa Dottori. Also, we've had a few for Socrates as well. Surely the good doctor has got to be Socrates. That's from Marcus in Glasgow, somebody who knows his footballing history. And another one, Doco, Also, the doctor's Brazilian shirt name should be Docrates. That's Socrates.
That's clever.
That's very clever, Docrates. Only one name for the great Kenny's Brazil shirt, given his trained occupation, says JB in Glasgow, Hippocrates. If you fancy any of these yourselves, Kenny, just shout, yeah?
Right, okay. My favourite one so far is Hagisio.
Hagisio.
Okay.
We've got one for Joaquinho as well. Another one from Paddy for Doctorino. And he said he texted you last time to tell you it's football, not soccer. I hope you didn't say soccer, because otherwise you won't be Soccerino. He says he hopes the Doctorino has learnt his lesson. You'll enjoy this. There's Ducarino from Andrew, and also Dan in Swansea, referring to my earlier question. He says, in answer to your question, why do footballers do backflips? Well, why do dogs lick their whatnots? Because they can. World Football phone-in on Up All Night for another 25 minutes. We've got the legend Dino in Rio to take any questions and comments you might have on South American football or players from over there playing in our leagues. We've got the Big Wheel in Kansas taking your questions and comments on football in North America, Major League Soccer, and players from over there playing in our leagues. And we have now got the newly named Jocrates, Kenny Duca, footballing ace, striker, formerly of Gretna, now with Real Salt Lake. I said we asked for a footballing shirt name for him. He's got Jocrates now, but you keep sending these texts in. I'm going to read some out just for your humour, your delectation. Jocrates. Kenaldo, says Seb in Leeds. Doc de Jocchio. El Duce, says Steve in Belfast. Accidentia e emergencia. Methodino, says Alex in Lincoln. Scotchino. Sweaty Socrates, says Simon on the M1. Also Lee in Leeds goes for Sweaty Socrates. And Big Al, says Serginho. Dr. Golo, says Big Dave, the Liverpool cabbie. El Locum, says one. Ronald Rodeo, says Glenn in London. Docrates from Kenny. From Coatbridge, Docrates again from Mark in Southport. Deuteronomy, says one. Hippocrates, says Kevin in East Kilbride. Sergio Ducarino. It goes on and on and on. Anyway, let's talk football. Mark in Devon, good morning. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hello, mate, you right?
Yeah, long time listener, first time caller.
Good to have you with us.
No problem, cheers. I'm ringing about the Argentinian national team. I've been watching them on Sky quite a bit. I just think that they need a big man up front to finish off the work of the Aguero, Messi, Tevez. Someone like Cruz or Crespo, just wondering what's happening with those two players. I know that Crespo left Chelsea. Just wondering where he is now and if he's going to start playing again.
Well, Crespo's at Inter Milan, but things aren't going very well for him there at all. And Inter Milan and Jose Mourinho there has left him out of the list for the Champions League. So I agree with you 100%. And from what Kenny Duca was saying, he would think that there's a need for a target man. And Crespo last played for him during the Copa America last year, got injured, and hasn't managed to get back since. And I think they've really, really missed him. Cruz played, Julio Cruz of Inter Milan, he played, his last game was in June, the 0-0 draw against Brazil. Every time he plays for Argentina, you look at him and you wonder, how on earth does he score all these goals in Europe? I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a confidence thing. But for Argentina, his performances have been very, very poor indeed. There is a target man in the squad. He came on for the last few minutes of the last game against Peru on Wednesday night. Herman Dennis, who plays for Napoli. But I think he's fairly ordinary. There'll be a big call, I think, now for Cavanaghi to come in, Fernando Cavanaghi of Bordeaux, who was a youth prodigy. He was the top scorer in the Argentinian league at the age of 18. His career kind of went down the pan for a while in Russia, Spartak Moscow, and he's now scoring goals with Bordeaux. So there'll be a big call for him to get in, and perhaps Higuain of Real Madrid, Gonzalo Higuain, may come in as well. He's a player who was actually born in France, because his father was playing there. And there was a doubt for a while about which citizenship he'd take out, whether he'd end up playing for France or playing for Argentina. And he speaks no French and lived there for the first 3 months of his life, and that's his only connection with the place. So he has gone for Argentina, but there's been a reluctance to call him up so far. But I agree with you, Mark. I think that there certainly is a need for a target man in there.
Yeah, there's just wondering if any of the youth players come through for Boca Juniors now. I think they've got a new striker, Negro, up front for them as well.
They've got a guy called Noir, a nippy little player who works the flanks, and a guy called Viatri, who's more of a penalty area player. I suppose one guy who might, if he can get a game there at Chelsea, he might come into the rankings, is Franco Di Santo.
Yeah, this young lad.
A little bit of a kind of young Rocky Santa Cruz about him. So, but that's the problem with the move that he's made. Had he stayed in South American football and scored his goals there and then moved on to a team where he was going to get more of a regular game, perhaps he'd be higher up the pecking order. But at Chelsea, his opportunities are perhaps not going to be plentiful.
So for Jocrates, is there an influx are you noticing an influx of UK players going over to the United States? One of our listeners wants you to tell him something about how Darren Huckabee's getting on out there.
He has made a massive difference to San Jose Earthquakes since his arrival. I think he's already scored 4 goals. They were the worst. They had the worst record in the MLS when they arrived. And they're making a run for the playoffs now. They're only 3 points behind us at the moment, and are making a great run. And we have to play them in a few weeks. But yeah, he's certainly made a difference. There's a few other players come over from the UK this year as well. A boy, Tam McManus, who was a youth player at Hibs, played for the Scotland under-21s, had a few teams in the UK, Dundee, Dunfermline, Boston, when they were in the Football League as well. So he's come over to Colorado. There's a few younger players come out, ex-Aberdeen youth players, and a couple of players that have played in the Scottish League as well. So there's a few Scottish boys over here, and obviously with the UK, Dan Huckabee's made a huge difference to the team that he's joined.
Yeah, the text was sent by Neil, who's a Norwich fan, who says that lots of Norwich fans over here are following San Jose as a result of their legend going over to that side. Sean, a question from your friend Jade in the USA, in Seattle, I believe. In Washington. The last time you were on the World Football Phone, you mentioned that the MLS were discussing going to an Apertura Clausura type schedule. Can you elaborate as to where you heard this from? And were they MLS bosses that told you, or players? Also, do you support this idea? Perhaps you can start off by telling us what an Apertura Clausura type schedule is.
An Apertura and a Clausura, those are the Spanish words for opening and closing. It's an opening and a closing championship. Mexico has had just incredible success. They've really taken, I think, the popularity of the Mexican First Division up a level because of this. Tim is seeing the Apertura Clausura system in South America. It's becoming very popular in Central America as well. What it is that you play 2 different seasons in a calendar year. So your opening championship and your closing championship. Essentially, you're playing August through December. You're then taking the winter months off. You're taking Christmas, New Year's off, Boxing Day. You're then coming back. You're playing end of January, early February into May, so then you have the summer off as well. It creates 2 separate competitions, and the idea is that if your club is really poor, well, they're not going to be really poor for a year. They're going to be really poor for about 4 months, and maybe they'll buy some players during either the winter or the summer break, and they'll come back. It's something that I know Major League Soccer has been talking about for a number of years. I know that this was lighting up on the internet, that this was something of a revelation I put out there, but actually this is something that's been discussed with the board of governors in Major League Soccer, people in the league office, head coaches, general managers. It's really been discussed for at least 4 years. I think it's an idea that is gaining momentum now because Major League Soccer has their own stadiums. Kenny, you're living the high life here. This is year 13 of Major League Soccer, but I've been in it since year 1, and it was pretty dire in the old days, 1996, 97, 98, when you're having crowds routinely of 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people in these massive NFL stadiums that seat 70, 80, 85,000. With your own stadiums, you're able to be the number one tenant. You get all of the scheduling. So now they don't have to schedule around American college football. They don't have to schedule around the National Football League. The idea is that there's fixture congestion right now too in Major League Soccer. They're not honoring the international dates. They're not aligned with the FIFA calendar. You have Major League Soccer clubs thrown into competitions like the Superliga, the U.S. Open Cup, the CONCACAF Champions League. You're still trying to play your fixtures in Major League Soccer. You have the international matches. We were talking about Houston earlier. The match I did for Houston still won 3-1 home to Kansas City last Sunday. They're missing their 4 best footballers on international duty, 2 with the United States and 2 with Canada. To go to an Apertura Clausura means that you're still skipping the coldest 6-7 weeks in America because the fear is that people aren't going to turn out for soccer. As we'll talk about it as soccer, not football for a moment, because in the American view, soccer in maybe a foot and a half of snow in December. And also, you want to get away from having to play over the World Cup. MLS has played over World Cups 98, 2002, and 2006, and I think it's getting to be a really embarrassing situation. So, sorry, this isn't a revelation. This isn't something that's come up in the last, say, 2 weeks. This is something that's been kicked around, but it's definitely gaining momentum. The 2 things that are gaining momentum in Major League Soccer are going to the single table and figuring out something to do with the scheduling. And Apertura Clausura is just one idea, but they're finding it untenable. Starting at the end of March and playing through to the end of November, it's just not working right now. It's just too separate from the rest of the football world.
Billy in Stockport, good morning.
Hi, Dalton.
Hiya.
I'd just like to say, I'm the first-time caller, but I listen as many times as I can to the show. Fantastic show. Absolutely fantastic.
Many thanks for that, mate.
Just a couple of questions for Tim, really, please.
Go ahead.
Right, I'm a Man City fan, Tim, and we've got... I listened to the thing about you said about Robinho last week, so we're all panicking this week in case he doesn't do it, you know. But we've got a player there.
Some fantastic moments, Bill. Some fantastic moments.
Oh, I can't wait. Actually, I'm a big fan of Brazil, and I was lucky enough actually in 1982 to go. It was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, actually.
Oh,
in 1982, wow. I managed to get to Spain to see the World. Well, to see actually a couple of games in the Brazilian group. Yeah. And we were in Seville at the time, and they were playing New Zealand. And I thought they had a fantastic side, that Brazilian side of 1982. I thought they were the best team personally, but during the game they had the Brazilian fans. I mean, the atmosphere was fantastic, but they had like a huge band with them, all dressed in white, doing the samba and everything like that. And later on, there was a great big party in a huge square in Seville. Can you tell me anything about? Did he have anything? Did he know anything about this? Like, did the band follow him around? They were all dressed in white, you see. There was about 20 of them playing like trumpets and drums and everything. It was fantastic, it was.
Well, if you can't have a party when you're watching that kind of football that they played in '82, you never will do. And that was perhaps you can see deficiencies in the side. They had a big centre forward, Serginho, who couldn't work with the skillful technical midfield that they had. Perhaps the right back Leandro wasn't physically fit as he had 1 or 2 injury problems, and they didn't have anyone playing the right side of midfield. So there were 1 or 2 imbalances there. But on the standard of midfield play that they had in that tournament, it was just absolute magic, and it seduced so many people. And I'm very jealous of the fact that you were there to watch it. Now that kind of band thing, that is the atmosphere of Brazilian football at its best. You still get things like this, although not usually with the uniforms, at some games of Brazilian club sides. And Flamengo, I remember for a few years, had a gang of old guys who'd wear the red and black shirt and that they'd play all the brass instruments. And it was absolutely, you felt that you were back in the 1940s or something. It was absolutely fantastic. Even if there are only 10,000 people in the stadium that could hold 100,000, the atmosphere was still absolutely great. But the Brazil travelling support for World Cups, it's hit very much by the fact that your average Brazilian football fan finds it very difficult to be able to afford the trip. It's a lot of money. So a lot of the people who are following Brazil in World Cups are not really football fans. They're middle class, upper middle class people who, all right, they're there to watch Brazil, but they're also there to do tourism. I remember when England played Brazil in the quarterfinals of the 2002 World Cup. The Brazilian commentator was going on about this. He was saying, look, this is a home game for England, and our supporters, they don't have any songs, they're not football supporters, and it's England here having a home game. The difference between the support is absolutely massive. And in the end, he concluded by saying, as he concluded by saying in the 2006 World Cup, the England support is much, much better than the team. The team don't deserve this level of support. Hopefully that'll be a bit different after the 4-1 the other night, Bill.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, as I say, that Brazilian side of the 80s was absolutely brilliant. Well, could we ask you, Tim? We've got City. We've got that player Zabaleta, the right back, and also they've got a player on a free transfer called, I think it's called Glauber from Germany. He's a Brazilian. They got him on a free transfer, I think, or he was out of. I think it's a centre half. Yeah. Could you tell me something about those two, please?
Yeah. Zabaleta is now 23. He's in the Argentina squad. He came off the bench the other night against Peru. He's won, say, 6 or 7 caps. To be honest, I see him more as a right-sided midfielder than as a fullback, although he is often featuring at fullback these days. He has a lot of thrust, really good engine. Not perhaps the classiest player in the world, but good enough and really competitive, good leadership figure. And he was captain of the Argentina under-20 team that won the World Youth Cup 3 years ago with Lionel Messi and Aguero and a few other players who've gone on to be big names. So he's a leadership figure who I think can do a really good, solid job. Glauber is a kind of lanky centre-back who has one cap for Brazil, played against Guatemala 3 or 4 years ago, who I remember coming up the ranks with playing under-20 football for Brazil and playing with Palmeiras, and then he was off my radar screen when he went off to Germany. The question mark I got in my mind against him coming in is that Brazilian centre-backs have really struggled with British football, and I'm never allowed to forget the fact that I thought Rafael Scheidt would do well at Celtic nearly a decade ago, and he was a disaster. Rocky Jr. got a World Cup winners' medal, was a disaster at Leeds. And quite often the Brazilian centre-backs, they like to position themselves very, very deep, almost on top of the goalkeeper. And in British football, they're forced into positions much higher up the field, where sometimes their lack of pace can be exposed, and they don't have the kind of 2 defensive midfielders planted in front of them. So they can be a little exposed sometimes. So I would say that if you get anything out of Glauber, terrific, that's a bonus. But Zabaleta, I think, will give you good, solid service down that right side of the field.
Billy, thanks a lot for the call, and call back any time. Email from Big Mark in Edinburgh. He says Kenny Duca's name Jocrates is good, but consider this: Duca's IPA, Indian Pale Ale, is brewed in Edinburgh by Scottish Caledonian breweries. Caledonia meaning Scotland. His Brazilian name connected to his own and the beer by his own name and Scotland should be Caladinho. But he has got a question for you, Kenny. Would Kenny ever return to the SPL, and if so, where would he like to play?
Well, obviously, if after my contract's up in the MLS, I would like to come back to Scotland, and if there's a good team in the SPL that'd be willing to take me, then it's something I would have to think about. I was always a fan of Dundee United. When I was a youngster, I was actually a mascot there one time. And I grew up, my friend was an avid Falkirk fan, and we used to get in free to the Falkirk games because his dad worked with the club. So I think Falkirk or Dundee United, if they came calling, then I wouldn't be able to say no.
And he's getting a little bit cheeky here, but I'll ask you anyway. He says, as you're in Salt Lake City, have you ever, or are you thinking of taking advantage of the multiple wife system there?
No, and I'm sure my fiancé is listening to this right now, so the answer is most definitely no.
What do you think she'll think of the name Jocrates?
Well, I'll have to ask her, but she texted me earlier and said that she was killing herself laughing at all the names that were coming in. And
there's
so
more. There's more. There's a whole lot more.
Don't encourage him. What have you done?
We have to keep them clean in case my grandma's listening as well.
Of course we shall. Kel's in Bath has sent a text, Sean, asking if you could tell him or her more about the Yanks in Liverpool. Are they anywhere near selling up? Kel's getting frustrated by their lack of investment.
I think everybody who supports Liverpool is getting frustrated on this. You know, and there's been a very public split, a very public row between the two American owners. George Gillette, who also owns the National Hockey League side Montreal Canadiens. There was some confusion that he was a Canadian. He's not. He's an American, but he owns the NHL club Montreal Canadiens. And Tom Hicks, who I've met in his office in Dallas, he owns the Major League Baseball side Texas Rangers, the National Hockey League side Dallas Stars. They don't get on. It's an unworkable situation. Something is going to give. I think something is going to give in the next few months. I cannot see in 1 year we're still talking about both men owning the club. Hicks of the two seems to have a stronger desire to get out. He's just kind of painted himself into the proverbial corner. Both could be gone. I think at the very least Tom Hicks is probably out. This is just my opinion, and from everything I've observed, I think that Hicks at the very least is out within the next 6 to 12 months.
Andy in Barry in South Wales says, can you tell us something about Eddie Johnson? Did he play for the USA? And if so, how did he play? And what do you think of his loan move to Cardiff? We've had a couple of texts on that.
Oh, that's a great move because he just could not settle in at Fulham. Eddie Johnson played for Kansas City Wizards. He's been really labeled as a prodigy. He came to Major League Soccer when he was 17 years old, and he is someone that people want to see succeed in the sport of football. He comes from an all-black area in the city of Miami in Florida. It's almost a fluke that Eddie Johnson was exposed to football because kids who grew up in his type of neighborhood and with his background, not just because he's black, but just in the area of the country he grew up in, the economic situation, they have a tendency to be either forced into basketball or into American football. And again, that just goes beyond race. That's almost a situation of economics and geography. Eddie Johnson is as good as he wants to be. And sometimes Eddie Johnson is frustrating to the point where you don't think he wants to be that good. I've seen him absolutely take sides apart at the international level as well as the Major League Soccer level. Eddie Johnson is the type of striker that can come out, score 3 or 4 goals, make it look easy, and then you see him in 5 matches and he absolutely disappears. It's not that I've gone off of him, and I've spoke glowingly about Eddie Johnson on this program for at least the last 3.5 years. He's not maturing the way that I would have hoped that Eddie Johnson would have matured. For someone who's been a professional footballer since they were 17 years old, Eddie Johnson needs to be better than he is right now. It's good for Eddie Johnson. He's not playing in the Premier League. He has a real chance now with Cardiff. I think they're a club that is definitely moving up. I think it's a club that's spending a lot of money. They have good ownership. They have a good manager. Eddie Johnson, if he keeps his focus, if he keeps his concentration, he can be a legitimate goal scorer in England or in Wales in this case.
It's not easy putting lipstick on a pig, is it? Edmund in the Oval, good morning.
Good morning, Dothan.
It's
good
still
morning,
a pig.
Sean. Sorry?
Good morning.
Sorry, I was just saying it's still a pig. I've just put some lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig.
All right. My question to Tim. Basically, I just want to find out about this Liverpool player, new Brazilian striker who's just come into the squad, Victor Flora. And also, why is it that South American coaches find it difficult to basically manage in the European games? Is it because of technical ability or tactical abilities?
They would say that it's because they get so few opportunities, that there haven't been that many that have come over. Obviously, the football is much quicker. And some of the big names, and Carlos Bianchi, who's a legend at Boca Juniors, has won everything with them. He's been over to Europe a few times. He's never succeeded. So the football is quicker. Sometimes they struggle to adapt to that. Another thing that one or two of them have commented on is they're not used to working with a squad that has 15 different nationalities in it. You don't get that in South American football. But there are some success stories, and especially look at Spain. A little Villarreal under the guy from Chile, Manuel Pellegrini. They came second in Spain last year. That's a fantastic achievement. We'll see now in England what Scolari will do. There'll be a lot of Brazilian coaches really hoping that Scolari comes off. Not perhaps because they might like him, but because they hope it might open the doors for them and give more opportunities for Brazilian coaches in European football. The striker you mentioned, Victor Flora, I've never seen him. He's 18 years old. He's playing for a team that's not even in the second division in Brazil, a team called Botafogo, but not the famous Botafogo of Rio, or Botafogo from upstate Sao Paulo. So this is a flyer that Liverpool have taken. Perhaps, and let's hope it's an inspired piece of scouting. So it's either going to prove to be an inspired piece of scouting or another case of a South American moving so young and ended up kicking his heels in reserve team squads in Europe.
I've just had a text here about the Olympic triple gold medalist Usain Bolt set to train with Spanish giants Real Madrid in a bid to improve the pace of their players. Boom, boom. No, it's true. It's true. It's actually true. Let's go through some of these names. Gosh, I was just about to go through them, and then I noticed that my text thing has just stopped. So I do apologise. I was hoping to get a few in before we lose all three of you, but oh gosh. Can you believe it, Kenny? I had so many more just to pass on to your grandma and to your missus as well. Okay, where should we start with this then? There's so many.
And Sir Duke, his dad, who suggested Docherty.
Of course, Doc Naldo. That's not a brilliant one, is it? Ern Bruninho. I thought that was quite good for Marty on the M54. Ern Bruninho, do you get it? Doctor Who Nino. Oh, the Paramedico from down in Swansea. Listen, it's been great having you on the show, Kenny. You're a good sport as well. Hope we can tempt you back on very soon.
No problem, it's been a pleasure.
And good luck in the match later on.
Thank you very much.
Take care. And Sean, all the best.
Thank you, Doc.
As ever, and the Legendino too. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to a download of the World Football Phone-In from Up All Night at BBC Radio 5 Live. You can put your questions live on Saturday mornings from 2:30am to 4am, or you can email us at upallnight@bbc.co.uk. That's upallnight, all one word, @bbc.co.uk.